The wind did not arrive first. The silence did. At the top of Copper Spine Pass, Clara Voss stopped because the one creature that had never questioned a trail suddenly refused to take another step. Scout planted all four paws into the snow. His body leaned toward the dark hillside instead of the road ahead. The storm had not fully reached them yet, but the dog already knew something she did not. Clara tightened her grip on the rope looped around her wrist and looked toward the valley hidden behind a curtain of white. 9 miles separated her from alder breaks. 9 miles that had suddenly become impossible. If you have ever wondered whether one small choice can decide who lives and who never reaches home, stay with Clara for a little while. This mountain was about to answer that question. The first blast of wind slammed into her hard enough to steal a breath from her lungs. Snow burst across the pass sideways. The wagon tracks she had followed all morning disappeared beneath fresh drifts, as if they had never existed. Her boots were soaked. The hem of her oversized wool coat snapped violently around her legs. She pressed one arm across her face and kept walking. Scout stayed beside her for another dozen steps. Then he stopped again. Not hesitant, not confused, certain. The blue healer's amber eye stayed fixed on the pine-covered hillside above the road. The pale gray eye, scarred years earlier by a broken fence wire, seemed almost white against the blowing snow. His ears lay flat. The thick fur along his back slowly lifted. Clara had only seen him stand like that twice before. Both times the weather had turned far worse than anyone expected. She looked toward the hill. Nothing. Only scattered pines, a limestone ridge, snow. Yet something felt different. Near the trees, the snow drifted almost straight downward instead of flying sideways. The mountain itself was breaking the wind. Her father had once told her that mountains always whispered before they shouted. She wished he were still alive to hear this one. Only 6 weeks earlier, Edmund Voss had been standing beside her in the Copper Spine barn, arguing over the best place to stack winter hay. Now he rested beneath frozen ground. His boots stood empty beside the fireplace she no longer owned. The thought came and went as quickly as the wind. There was no room for memory on an open mountain. Only the next step mattered. Her father had spent more than 20 years turning rough Montana land into a working homestead. He arrived with little more than an axe, a mule, and enough determination to outlast bad seasons. He built fences before comforts. A barn before a proper bedroom. He often laughed that cattle complained louder than people. Clara grew up beside him instead of behind him. She learned how to sharpen tools before most girls learned embroidery. She knew how to judge timber by its smell. She could spot rotten grain before opening the sack. When other children practiced handwriting, Edmund taught her how to read contracts and land maps. Knowledge weighed nothing. That was why he insisted she carry as much of it as possible. Those lessons became priceless after his funeral. 11 days after the burial, Garrett Aldrich walked into their kitchen carrying folded papers and polished boots untouched by mud. His voice stayed calm, almost friendly. He claimed Edmund had transferred control of Copper Spine before his death. The document carried signatures, official stamps. Everything looked proper. Everything except the truth. Clara remembered reading the original agreement herself. It promised seasonal grazing rights. Nothing more. Garrett calmly folded the paper again before she could study it longer. "If you disagree," he said, "the land office will hear you." He buttoned his coat. "It may take months." Outside, 2 hired men waited beside their horses. Inside, Clara stood alone. Garrett left $30 on the kitchen table, a sack of dried beans, and a deadline, 1 week. After that, Copper Spine belonged to him. She packed only what mattered. Her father's ledger disappeared beneath her coat before anyone noticed. A few candles, salt pork, half a loaf of cornbread, 1 blanket, $30. Scout. She cried exactly once, less than a minute. When the tears stopped, so did the past. The road ahead demanded every piece of attention she still possessed. Now that road had vanished beneath blowing snow. Cold worked differently than most people imagined. It did not always begin with pain. Sometimes it simply slowed everything. Thoughts arrived a heartbeat later than expected. Hands obeyed more slowly. Legs grew strangely heavy. Clara noticed every warning because Edmund had forced her to read old frontier medical guides during long winters. He always said that people rarely froze because they lacked strength. They froze because they stopped recognizing danger. Scout barked once. Sharp. Urgent. Then he left the road. He climbed toward the hillside without looking back. Clara stared after him. If she followed the road, she might eventually reach town. If she followed the dog, she had no idea where she would end up. Another blast of wind answered for her. The road vanished completely. White swallowed everything beyond 30 feet. She pulled her coat tighter and began climbing after Scout. Each step buried her nearly to the knee. Hidden rocks twisted beneath fresh snow. Her breathing grew rough. The climb felt twice as steep as it looked. Halfway up, Scout disappeared beyond a rise. His bark changed. Short, excited, almost impatient. Clara forced herself higher. She reached the crest and found him clawing furiously at the base of the limestone bluff. Snow flew behind him. At first she saw nothing unusual. Then her eyes caught it. A perfectly straight shadow. Only 4 feet wide. Too even. Too clean. Nature almost never carved straight lines. People did. She dropped beside the dog and brushed snow away with both gloves. Her fingers struck iron beneath the drift. An old latch. Cold. Solid. Attached to weathered timber buried inside the hillside. A door. Clara pulled one glove off with her teeth and pressed her bare hand against the crack around the frame. The stone felt cold, but not as cold as the mountain around it. Something waited beyond that door. Something the blizzard had not touched. She wrapped both hands around the frozen iron latch and pulled with everything she had left. Clara pulled. The frozen hinges resisted for one long moment. Then they gave way with a deep groan that disappeared beneath the roar of the blizzard. A current of still air slipped through the opening. It was cold, but it was living cold, not the biting wind that stripped warmth from bone. Scout stepped through the doorway without waiting. That alone told Clara enough. She squeezed inside, dragged the heavy timber door shut, and dropped the iron bar into place. Everything changed. The storm vanished. Not completely. Only a distant rumble remained above the earth. For several heartbeats she simply stood there, breathing. The quiet felt almost impossible after hours inside screaming wind. She struck a match. Its small flame revealed rough cedar beams supporting a narrow tunnel. Stone steps disappeared into darkness. The walls were packed earth instead of bare rock. Someone had built this. Someone had worked here for years. Scout was already several steps below, his claws clicking softly against stone. Clara followed carefully. Each step downward stole another piece of winter away. The air grew steadier, dry, almost gentle. The smell changed too. Cold snow gave way to cedar, old timber, and something else. Dried apples. She reached the bottom and lit another match. The tiny flame revealed a chamber large enough to shelter several families. Heavy wooden shelves covered every wall. Glass jars stood in perfect rows. Canvas sacks rested on limestone blocks above the floor. Barrels lined one corner. Bundles of dried herbs hung from overhead beams. Nothing looked abandoned. Everything looked prepared. Whoever built this place expected someone to need it. Clara walked slowly around the room, exactly as her father had taught her. Never rush through unfamiliar ground. Notice everything. The jars held preserved beans, corn, turnips, wild berries. Dried beef hung neatly from iron hooks. Firewood rested beneath thick oilcloth, protected from damp air. Every shelf sat several inches above the floor to keep moisture away. Even before touching anything, she understood one truth. This shelter had been designed by someone who knew winter better than most people ever would. Scout stopped beside a cast-iron stove. He looked back at her once, almost waiting. Clara knelt beside it. The firebox was clean. Ash still rested inside from an older fire long since burned away. Beside the stove lay dry kindlings stacked with careful hands. No careless person left wood this neatly. She smiled for the first time in days, not because she felt safe, because someone she had never met had planned ahead. She built the fire slowly. Small sticks first, then thicker cedar. Orange light spread across the chamber. For a moment everything seemed perfect. Then smoke rolled back into the room. Instead of climbing the chimney, gray clouds spilled across the ceiling. Scout immediately moved toward the tunnel entrance. Clara stayed calm. Her father had fought blocked stovepipes before. She searched the wall until she found an iron cleaning rod hanging beside the chimney. Standing on the nearest shelf, she pushed the rod upward. The blockage broke free with a sharp crack. Chunks of packed ice rattled down inside the pipe. A rush of cold air swept through the chimney. The fire suddenly leaned forward. Smoke disappeared. The room cleared within minutes. Clara climbed down and placed one hand against the warm stove. "That will do," she whispered. Scout circled once before settling beside the growing fire. Only now did Clara allow herself to eat. She opened one preserved jar. Sweet corn. Simple. Cold. Better than any meal she could remember. She shared dried beef with Scout before drinking from one of the sealed barrels. The water tasted old but clean. Whoever built this place had even solved the problem of winter water. Near the ceiling, a narrow stone channel carried melted snow into the storage barrel. Nothing here happened by accident. Everything served a purpose. The hours passed quietly. As warmth slowly returned to her hands, Clara finally explored every corner. She found drainage channels cut beneath the shelves, ventilation openings hidden inside the limestone, storage arranged so older food could be used first. She almost felt as though the builder were still walking beside her, explaining every decision without saying a word. Near the back wall, she noticed something wrapped in weathered leather. She carried it closer to the stove. Inside rested a journal. Its cover was cracked with age. Across the front, carefully written in faded ink, stood a single name: Agnes Whitmore. Clara opened the first page carefully. The handwriting was small, orderly. Every inch of paper had been used wisely. The earliest entry dated back several years. Agnes had written that she worked as a frontier midwife. She traveled mountain trails through every season because families had no one else to call. Then one winter nearly ended her life. She survived only because her horse found shelter before she did. Afterward, she made herself one promise: she would never trust luck again. The journal described 3 summers of digging, building, hauling timber, learning ventilation from mining crews, studying moisture inside caves, testing food storage until nothing spoiled. Every page revealed another careful improvement. Nothing had been rushed, nothing wasted. Clara kept reading long after the fire settled into glowing coals. One sentence stopped her completely. It had been written with heavier pressure than every other line on the page. "Prepare while the sky is clear. Storms never ask permission." She quietly closed the journal. The fire crackled. Scout slept peacefully beside the stove. Outside, thousands of tons of snow continued crashing across the mountain. Inside, one woman's careful work from years earlier was keeping 2 strangers alive. If Agnes Whitmore had hidden this place so well, why had no one in Alder Breaks ever spoken her name? Before Clara could answer that question, Scout suddenly lifted his head. His ears turned toward the buried entrance. Then came 3 slow knocks from somewhere beyond the heavy door. 3 slow knocks. They were so faint that Clara almost believed she had imagined them. Scout had not. He was already standing. His body remained still, but every muscle had tightened beneath his coat. His nose pointed toward the tunnel leading back to the hidden entrance. Another 3 knocks. Then silence. Clara lifted the lantern from its hook. The warm chamber faded behind her as she climbed the stone steps. Each step carried colder air. The farther she climbed, the louder the wind became. She stopped beside the heavy timber door. Whoever stood outside had crossed a mountain that was trying to kill them. If she opened the door to the wrong person, everyone inside could pay the price. She rested one hand on the wooden bar. "Who's there?" The answer barely reached her through the storm. "Hector." The voice cracked. "Hector Baines." Clara pulled the bar free and forced the door open against the packed snow. A man collapsed through the opening before she could step aside. Scout sniffed him once, then relaxed. That was enough. Together they dragged Hector inside and pushed the door shut again. The ranch hand could barely stand. Ice covered his beard. One glove had frozen solid around the reins he no longer held. His right hand had turned pale gray across 3 fingers. He tried to speak. Nothing came except a rough cough. Clara guided him beside the stove without wasting a single movement. "Don't rub your hand," she said quietly. "It'll make it worse." She warmed water slowly. Not hot. Her father had warned her years ago that frozen flesh could be damaged as easily by careless warmth as by cold itself. She wrapped the injured fingers with soft cloth after cleaning them. Scout lay beside Hector's boots until the man's breathing settled into a steady rhythm. Only then did Clara hand him a bowl of warm broth made from dried beef and vegetables. He drank every drop without lifting his eyes. After a long silence, he finally looked around the chamber. "I saw smoke," he whispered. "I thought it was a cabin." "It nearly was," Clara answered. Hector stared at the shelves, the barrels, the stove, then at Clara. "I've lived here 12 years. I never knew this place existed." "Neither did I." She showed him Agnes Whitmore's journal. Hector read only a few pages before carefully closing it again. "She built all this alone? So it seems." He slowly shook his head. Outside, the storm continued pounding the mountainside. Inside, the fire glowed steadily against the limestone wall. Morning never truly arrived. Only a weak gray light slipped beneath the cracks around the hidden door. The wind had not eased. If anything, it sounded deeper now, the kind of storm that settled in instead of passing through. Clara refused to sit still. She walked through the shelter, taking inventory. Every jar counted. Every sack examined. She found cracked wax around 2 grain bags and sealed them again with melted tallow. She cleared thin ice from a drainage trench before it could spread beneath the shelves. She checked the chimney twice. Agnes had written that survival usually failed because people ignored small problems until they became large ones. Clara intended to ignore nothing. Hector watched her work for most of the morning. "You've done this before." "My father believed preparation was cheaper than regret." He nodded once. He was right. By afternoon, Scout raised his head again. This time he barked only once. A different sound. Not alarm. Expectation. Clara climbed the stairs. 2 figures stood outside. A woman wrapped in heavy blankets held the hand of a young boy. Another child leaned against her side, barely able to stand. Snow covered them almost completely. The older boy tried to speak first. "Our stovepipe." He coughed hard. It fell in. Smoke. Collapsed roof. No shelter left. Clara opened the door wider. "Come inside." The woman introduced herself as Ruth Harland. The younger child was only 7. His boots had worn through during the climb. His feet were wrapped in strips of burlap instead. Clara carefully removed the frozen cloth. Scout quietly pressed himself against the boy's legs, sharing warmth without being asked. The child rested one trembling hand on the dog's neck. For the first time since arriving, he stopped shaking. Ruth looked around the chamber in disbelief. Who made this place? A woman named Agnes Whitmore. She expected someone would need it someday. Ruth lowered her eyes. Then today she saved my boys. The shelter grew busier. Not crowded yet, just alive. Everyone accepted work without being told. Ruth organized the food shelves. Hector inspected the chimney after every meal. Clara measured water, fed the stove, checked the ventilation. Even Scout found his place. He slept beside whichever child seemed most restless. When footsteps echoed near the entrance, he reached the tunnel first. No barking. Only listening. Late on the fourth evening, another knock sounded. Then another. This time it was an old trapper named Seb Cord. His beard carried enough ice to look carved from stone. Behind him came a young husband supporting his injured wife. The next morning another family appeared. Then another. Each arrival carried the same look. Exhaustion, cold, and disbelief when they saw what waited beneath the hill. Within 2 days, the chamber held more than a dozen people. The shelves that once looked endless suddenly required careful counting. Clara gathered everyone around the stove. She spoke quietly. No speeches, no grand promises. We have enough. She rested one hand on the nearest barrel. If we waste nothing. Nobody argued. Everyone understood. Children gathered kindling. Adults repaired blankets. Seb redesigned part of the drainage channel using ideas he remembered from old mining tunnels. Evening after evening, the hidden shelter became less like strangers sharing a room and more like people protecting the same fire. One night, Ruth watched Clara writing numbers inside her father's old ledger. "You still keep records." "My father never trusted memory alone." Ruth smiled faintly. "Neither should we." The wind finally began changing during the 9th night. Not weaker, different. Longer pauses. Shorter bursts. Scout suddenly stood from beside the stove. His ears lifted. His tail moved once. Then he walked calmly toward the entrance. Someone else had reached the buried door. But this time, the man waiting outside carried something far more dangerous than frostbite. Tucked beneath his coat was a leather document case, bearing the official seal of the Montana Territorial Land Office. Benjamin Croft stepped inside and closed the heavy door behind him. Snow covered his coat from collar to boots. The leather case beneath his arm remained dry. Scout walked toward him. He sniffed the deputy once, then quietly returned to the fire. Clara noticed that before she noticed the badge, dogs judged people long before papers ever did. Croft removed his gloves slowly and looked around the shelter. Children slept beneath stacked blankets. Hector was clearing the chimney draft. Ruth measured grain into small cloth bags. Seb checked the drainage channel with a lantern. No one stood idle. No one argued. The room worked because every person had become part of it. Croft rested one hand against the limestone wall behind the stove. He left it there for several seconds. "It holds the heat." "It does," Clara answered. "It has for days." He nodded. "I've never seen anything built quite like this. It wasn't built quickly." She handed him Agnes Whitmore's journal. It was built carefully. Croft spent nearly an hour reading beside the fire. No one interrupted him. When he finally closed the journal, he looked at Clara with a different expression than the one he had carried into the shelter. "I need to ask you something." "My father's ledger?" She already knew. Croft gave a slow nod. "You still have it." Clara reached beneath her coat. The worn leather book had remained with her from the day she left Copper Spine. She placed it carefully into his hands. Croft opened the pages beside the lantern. Every agreement Edmund Voss had ever signed had been copied into the ledger in his own handwriting. Every payment, every boundary, every witness, every date, page after page. Croft removed Garrett Aldrich's deed from the leather document case. He laid both documents side by side. Silence settled across the room. Only the fire moved. His finger traced one date, then another. His eyes narrowed. Finally he looked up. The signatures match. Clara remained quiet. "But these dates don't." He turned another page. "The agreement your father copied gives seasonal grazing rights." He lifted Aldrich's document. "This one transfers ownership." The room stayed silent. Croft read both papers again. Longer this time. When he finished, he carefully closed the forged deed. "I approved this because I believed it was genuine." He looked directly at Clara. "I no longer believe that." No celebration followed. Only another log placed into the stove. Outside, the storm still owned the mountain. Inside, truth had finally begun catching up. 3 days later, the wind faded. The silence returned. This time it remained. Clara opened the hidden door at sunrise. Bright light covered the valley. Snow reached halfway up fences. Several cabins had partially collapsed beneath its weight. Entire sections of road had disappeared. Scout stepped into the fresh snow beside her. He lifted his nose toward the cold morning air. Then his tail gave one calm sweep. The danger had passed. Families left the shelter one at a time. No one hurried. Before leaving, each person quietly replaced something. A sack of grain, a bundle of cedar, a jar of preserved vegetables. No one discussed it. They simply understood. By the second afternoon, the chamber stood nearly empty again. Only Clara remained beside the stove. She carefully cleaned every shelf, swept the floor, resealed open jars. She left the shelter ready for whoever might need it next. Weeks later, when the mountain roads finally opened, Deputy Croft rode to the Territorial Land Office with Edmund Voss's ledger secured inside his saddlebag. The investigation lasted through the end of winter. Witnesses were questioned. Records were examined. Old filings were compared. Garrett Aldrich's story slowly unraveled beneath its own weight. The copied dates failed. The handwriting expert from the territory confirmed changes had been made after Edmund signed the original agreement. The forged deed was thrown out. By late spring, the Copper Spine homestead legally belonged to Clara once again. Garrett Aldrich packed his belongings before sunrise one morning. Few people watched him leave. Even fewer wished him back. Clara never chased him. Her land mattered more than revenge. Spring returned slowly to the mountains. Snow slipped from the pine branches. Water filled the creeks again. Neighbors arrived without invitations. Hector repaired the barn roof. Seb rebuilt the stone smokehouse. Ruth's sons reset broken fence posts one after another until the pasture stretched whole across the hillside. Nobody asked for payment. Some debts could not be measured with money. One warm evening, Clara climbed back to the hidden shelter. Scout followed quietly beside her. The heavy door still rested perfectly inside the limestone. Inside, everything remained dry. Everything waited. The shelves were no longer completely full. Yet they were far from empty. Families had replaced nearly everything they had used during the storm. The journal rested exactly where Clara had left it. She opened the first page once more, then gently closed it. Agnes Whitmore had prepared this place years before anyone realized they would need it. She never met the people whose lives would continue because of her work. Yet every careful decision she made still lived inside those walls. Clara stepped outside. The evening sun settled across Copper Spine. Smoke rose peacefully from homes throughout the valley. Each chimney now built a little better than before. Each cellar dug a little deeper. Each family prepared a little earlier. Scout sat beside her, watching the hillside where he had stopped that winter morning. Clara scratched the soft fur behind his amber ear. "You already knew," she whispered. The old dog leaned gently against her leg. Below them, the valley carried on with ordinary life. Very few people would ever notice the weathered door hidden in the limestone. That was all right. It did not need attention. It only needed to be ready when another hard winter came. If this journey stayed with you, let us know in the comments what moment touched you the most. And if you enjoy stories of courage, survival, and forgotten frontier wisdom, don't forget to like the video, subscribe, and join us for the next story.